At some point in time, the Rambam decided to formulate his Yud Gimel Ikarim, the 13 Principles of Faith, in which he crystallized what he believed to be the underpinnings for the fulfillment of the Taryag Mitzvot. Number 6 to 9 relate to the attitude Judaism demands regarding the text of the Torah, that the words of the prophets, beginning with Moshe Rabbeinu, are true, that the text of the Torah that we now possess was the text composed by HaKadosh Baruch and transmitted to Moshe Rabbeinu, and as such has not undergone a revision, nor will it be or cannot be changed by subsequent generations. The Torah itself is concerned primarily with the observance of the Taryag Mitzvot. The Rambam, along with many of the Rishonim who lived both before and after the Rambam, focused their attention primarily on the way these Taryag Mitzvot were to be observed in the ever-changing conditions of the modernity in their respective days. The Rambam, for example, authored the 14 volumes of the Mishnah Torah. The Ikarim form part of what now has become known as the Hashkafa component of Judaism, namely the attitudes within Judaism that one must have in an ideal world for a full and complete observance of these mitzvot. For better or for worse, Judaism of the 20th and 21st century appears to be more focused on hashkafa, partly due to the emergence of the internet, which offered everyone who wished, both Jewish and non-Jewish, the opportunity to preach to the world a message of truth in the non-Jewish world based upon the Holy Bible, or those speaking in the name of Islam preaching their version of the truths that they draw from the Quran. And in the Jewish world, the internet has provided a platform for the Jewish preacher to very easily gain his or her 15 minutes of fame, because they speak in the name of Torah, and Torah is emet, a concept highlighted by the Rambam in his 13 Ikarim. There is, however, one problem. That is that while halacha is limited and controlled and works by a set of ground rules, the topic of hashkafa, attitude regarding the fulfillment of the Taryag Mitzvot, are subjective, in that in most cases they merely reflect the biases of the individual, and by the same token they are limited in scope, in that most of the individual, especially those who are internet rabbis, have a limited view of the complex world about which they speak, and in many cases the Divrei Torah reflect some particular agenda that is promoted by the speaker. And therefore I approach the following topic with a degree of trepidation, keeping in mind that my own personal views are subjective, they are limited in scope, and hence I will be the first to acknowledge that the truth is not necessarily here. With that disclaimer, I shall return to the topic of the Taryag Mitzvot, and the attempt by the Rambam to delineate and define the principles of hashkafa as reflected in the Yud Gimel Ikarim Shel HaRambam, better described as principles of faith, emunah, dare I say, underpin the three branches of from orthodoxy, that of the Hasidic Jew, the Yeshivish Jew, and the right-wing centrist. These principles of emunah can be broken up into 5 broad categories, beginning with the concept of God, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the relationship between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and man, the authenticity of Torah, the concept of accountability, reward and punishment, and the belief and acceptance of a messianic age. The Frum Orthodox Jew subscribes to these Ikarim. Non-Frum Orthodox, such as nowadays pluralistic Judaism and open Orthodoxy, not necessarily so. Which brings me to a little-known blog, the SHABBOS BLETTEL, which initially I attributed to the Bundists of the late 1800s, many of whom grew up in a frum but ignorantly Jewish home. They parted company and very often wrote satirical pieces of parody on Orthodox Jewish life. Such Jews no longer exist, and hence one would wonder as to who was the target audience for a blog that was written as recently as 2013. My conclusion is that the authors and the target audience would appear to be a modern-day parallel to the Bundists of the late 1800s, individuals who had grown up in a seriously Haredi environment, exposed to an intense and thorough text-based Jewish curriculum, and who, in their move into adulthood, have parted company from their host environment. Somewhat fascinating is what seems to be an update of the Rambam's 13 Ikarim, in which there is a listing of core hashkafa as opposed to emunah positions that reflect frum orthodoxy of today. One that is relevant to the Sikha is the very controversial acceptance of Ani Ma'amin Be'emunah Shlema Sheme'ito Yitbarech Lo Teitze Hara'ot, that no evil emanates from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As problematic this hashkafa position is, it is one that is a given in the belief structure of all three branches of Frum Orthodoxy. It is a concept that has a textual base, one that is read on the night of Tisha B'Av, in which Yirmiyahu states in his dirge over the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash that Mipi Elyon Lo Teitze Hara'ot, evil, bad, does not come from Elyon, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The updated version of the Ani Ma'amin goes on to state that Ve'ein Shum Ra Ba'olam, there is no evil in the world, V'hakol L'tova, it is only perceived to be evil, but in reality there is a silver lining, and that the perceived Ra, or evil, reflects the good intentions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This second stanza is where the ideology of the Hasidic, Yeshivish and right-wing centrists may disagree, although ultimately when bad things happen, and when one has exhausted all possible avenues, even the right-wing centrists would subscribe to the bracha of Baruch Atah Hashem Dayan Ha'emet. It is the third stanza of this Ani Ma'amim that is problematic, and for which I suggest reflects the hidden agenda of its authors. And that is, V'chol Pur'aniyot she'einena ro'ot, all punishment reflected in this perceived evil emanating from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, af b'ktzei ha'olam, in all corners of the earth, rak b'shvil Yisrael hen. Their purpose is, and they are brought about, on account of God's relationship with Am Yisrael. Common sense would reject this third stanza in all three expressions of Frum Orthodox. My thesis would be that it has been included in order to demonstrate the need to also reject the first two stanzas of this Ani Ma'amin. If stanza number 3 is preposterous, then those who subscribe to stanza 1 and 2 do so out of pure ignorance. Hence my conclusion that this reworking of the Ani Ma'amims from the Shabbat Brettel comes from an anti-Frum source. As noted, stanza number 1 and number 2 are positions of Hashkafa that do resonate within the Frum Orthodox world, but they do pose a crisis of faith. If we are to accept a God-man interaction, how does one at the same time maintain and explain the Ra Ba'olam, the mass destruction of life through war, the pandemics such as the Spanish influenza that wiped out 24 million people? How does one cope with the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash, in which 1/3 of the Jewish population died, and of course in more recent times where once again almost 1/3 of the Jewish population perished in the Holocaust? And on a personal level, how does one explain the innocent baby who spends 4 months in an intensive care unit, or the individuals who are caught up in the acts of terror? It's not a new question. It is one that's been around for many thousands of years, and it is one that relates directly to the Sikha under discussion.